how to multiply a matrix by another matrix. So the first thing you have to do is you actually have to make sure that you're able to multiply the two matrices. Alright, so you need to make sure that the number of columns in the first matrix is equal to the number of rows in the second. Okay, so this has two rows here. Alright, so row 1, row 2. And this one has two columns. Right? Column 1, column 2. This one has two rows, row 1, row 2. Right? This can be tricky to some people because there's only one element in each row, but it does have two rows. And it only has one column, right? One column here. Okay? So the number of columns has to equal the number of columns of the first one has to equal the number of rows of the second matrix. So the number of columns of the first one is 2, 1, 2. The number of rows of the second one is 2, 1, 2. So we can actually multiply these two. Okay? So how you do it is you multiply the elements of each row of matrix 1 by the elements of each column of matrix 2, and then you add them. So in order to get the element for row 1, column 1, you multiply the entire row 1 by the entire row 1 of matrix 1 by the entire column 1 of matrix 2. So that would be negative 3 times 5 here. And then you add that to 3 times negative 1. Okay, so you kind of do this turning kind of thing. You got to get used to that. A rotating, turning, multiplication thing. After you do it so many times, you kind of see that in your head. So row 1, column 1 of our answer matrix is going to be negative 18. Okay, so that's how we do it, you see. So I drew these arrows here to help you remember. Okay, so row 2, column 1 of our answer matrix consists of 1 times negative 3. Alright, so now it's going to be here, right? So here, and then negative 5 times negative 1. Okay, so here's this rotating thing. I don't know if this mouse cursor moving around helps you, but it helps me when I had to do it many times in high school and college. So this becomes 2 right here, right? And that's actually it because, right, the answer matrix, okay, will have the dimensions of the number of rows of the first matrix and the number of columns of the second. So the number of rows of the first one is 2. The number of columns of the second one is 1. Okay? Alright, so that's it. Okay, so this is pretty tricky, so I got a couple more examples. So our next one, let's see if you remember. Alright, so the first thing we do, make sure we're able to multiply them. Right? So this one is a 3 by 3, right? 3 rows by 3 columns. And this is a 1 by 3. Okay, so some people might get tricked by this and oh yeah, I can do it. But actually you cannot. Okay? We can't do it because, remember, the number of columns has to equal the number of rows. And since it says 3 columns, this only has 1 row. 3 is not equal to 1. Therefore, can't multiply them. So, there's no solution for this one. Okay? Alright. So that was a good review. Remember, the number of columns in matrix 1 has to equal the number of rows in matrix 2. Okay? The number of columns has to equal the number of rows. You gotta remember that. You gotta stick that in your brain. Alright, so let's try one more. Alright, so this one. Here we go. Let's see if we can multiply this one. Alright, so first we check. Alright. So this one is 2 rows, 3 columns, 3 rows, 3 columns, right? So the number of columns is actually equal to the number of rows here. So we can do it. Okay, because we have 3 here and we have 3 here. Okay. Alright. Now our ending matrix, though, remember, is going to be equal to the number of rows of the first one, the number of columns of the second one. So our resulting matrix is actually going to be a 2 by 3. Okay, so let's check this out. Alright, remember, we got to multiply the elements right, the rows by the columns. Alright, rows of the first one by the columns of the second. Alright, so the element at row 1, column 1 would then be, alright, 0 times 3 plus negative 4 times negative 1 plus negative 5 times negative 5. This gives me 29. Alright, row 1, column 2. Alright, row 1, column 2 would be here, right? Okay, so that's going to be 0 times negative 5, right? Because since we're at the second column, or row 1, column 2. 0 times negative 5, 4 times negative 3, and so on. Okay, so we got negative 37, okay, alright, and so on. So you gotta just, it's a very tedious thing to do, right? So if we wanted to get this one, we would multiply these by this, right? If we wanted to get this value, we'd multiply these by this. If we want to get this value, multiply these here. If we wanted to get this value, multiply this by this. Okay? So I only showed the first two because it would take up too much time, but that's how you do it. That completes our problem.